A couple days ago, I found myself in a scenario similar to this with windows in the background. I could shoot like this or like this. I have been pushing to shoot as bright as I can in certain scenarios, knowing that it can be brought down in post. Exposing to the right is not new, but there are some tools that make me more okay with exposing to the right, even though that's not traditionally how I. With Davinci Resolve and the HDR wheels, you can adjust exposure in the same way that exposure adjustments happen in the actual camera. To be able to adjust exposure that exact makes me want to push it a little bit further. This obviously looks, this is about as bright as I can get it at 800 ISO with the lighting that's in here right now. So I am going to check our false color. There's no clipping, and we can see what it looks like to bring it down in post. When you expose really hot, but just below clip, you get a lot of details in your shadows. In my hair and in the back of the monitor here, there is a lot of information. Then when you bring down the overall exposure, you get your scene looking right. Then you bring up your shadows a little bit, and likely your shadows will not even be brought up to the point at which they were recorded. So you have really clean shadows that you can see, and your overall scene looks good. Whereas if we exposed to what looked good on the monitor, so we can toggle back and forth between those two clips and see that the exposure matches. As long as the lighting in your scene is within the dynamic range capabilities of the sensor, give it as much light as you can give it so that you have as much flexibility in post as possible. And there are scenarios to change your ISO, but I kind of stay between 640 and 1600 in any of the ISOs that you're working with. Even if you do go down to 160, this really does apply for any of the ISOs. Similar scenario here. I have 6 stops of ND. I am going to go as far as we can possibly go. And at this point, I'm unsure if this is clipping. So I'm gonna check false colors, and it's not clipping. This is in 709. And we can see what this overexposed image looks like pulled down compared to what more accurate exposure looks like in camera. Shooting outside like this is kind of risky unless you have the opportunity to constantly be checking if the log image is clipped. The light changes pretty quickly outside, and you don't want to be putting yourself in a position where you're looking at a LUT that makes you think that your exposure is totally fine, but then when you see it later, it is actually clipped. In a studio product lighting type of scenario, do we go back to the bathroom studio? Maybe. So here we have a shot of a bottle. I poured some water on it. Just seems like it needed water on it. Just so you know, I wouldn't shoot the bottle with this lens or this stop. I would shoot it at 100 millimeters and as closed down as I could be. Long lens, everything in focus, tons of light. If you look at product images, at least stills, that's what you'll see a lot of times. And I think it looks good. You're working in small little sets, so it's cool to have a lot of it in focus. Also, this is not how I would light this product, but I don't care about any of that right now. I just want to look at the results we can get from overexposing. I just have enough light in here to be able to overexpose the image. That was the only goal, to get the absolute cleanest image possible, which can be important when tracking, color grading, stabilizing, any VFX work, clean up to make the color of the product match what it looks like in real life, which is a thing. Having the cleanest image possible will help in all of those areas. We have 4 stops of ND in here right now, and I'm gonna just look at our false colors. I have false colors set to show what the log image is seeing. I'm gonna drop the ND. I'll drop 2 more stops. This, I can barely even see the full product or the background. I'm gonna check our false color. We are not clipping. I'm gonna stick with this exposure. I have 4 LUTs on the camera, a -1 stop, -2 stops, 3 and 4. This works well in the studio because you have controlled lighting. I can every once in a while look at the false colors and make sure that we're not clipping, but what can't happen is anybody else to see an image like this. So I'm gonna go into our looks. Here's a -1, -2, -3, and -4. So I'm gonna shoot this project at this exposure with a -4 stop 709 LUT on the camera. This is not a creative LUT, it is just, in the past, we couldn't do this accurately, and this is why it's more fun to shoot like this, because you can get exact results on the monitor and in post. we can see with the product the 709 image, and the only thing we have on here right now is the 709 LUT that's built into this camera. So I'm gonna add a node before this and map it to the Alexa, and I know that this is 4 stops overexposed from where we wanted. I will drop this down by 4 stops, and this gets us to the point at which I said when looking at the monitor it looked good. And we have a nice image with really low noise. That's 1000% zoomed in. Minus the little moves in the camera, I can barely tell that this image is even moving at 1000% zoomed in. That is pretty cool, and at 800 ISO the image is pretty clean as is, so to drop the exposure down that much will even clean it up more. In any tracking that we might do on this, if the camera was moving, we will have a nice and easy time. The same goes for this clip right here. This is the image we would see on the monitor with no correction LUT. I have our same mapped HDR wheel here, and I'm going to bring down our exposure, and I think that's where we may have been. So this is our shot that I liked originally, exposed in camera, and this is overexposed and brought down. So I'm going to zoom in to here, 1000% zoomed in. This is the same clip exposed in camera, same ISO and everything. And the second shot is the same ISO, but we brought it down, and you can just see how much less noise is there. We can see barely any noise here. So we have the same look, but no noise in one of them. I don't think that noise is a bad thing, but there's sometimes that you want really clean images. It can also allow you to crop in more, and then you want to pull a still. The less noise that you have, the more you will be able to do that. And let's see this shot of me. I'm gonna take a frame of our accurate exposure and apply it here, and in our mapped HDR wheels, I'm gonna bring down the exposure till my face lines out somewhere around here, and that's about 2 stops, which makes sense. And keep in mind, light was changing pretty quick outside. And I'm going to split this clip so we can have 2 different grades, and turn off the HDR in this one, so we have this shot brought down by 2 stops and this shot not touched. I am going to go and zoom in to this monitor, and we can see the difference in the noise. Since our shadows were right here on this clip and they were only right here on this clip, you can see a lot more detail in here. So this is with our grade bypassed. We overexposed here, and we have a lot more information in the shadows and a little bit less information in the shadows here. I will turn our grades back on, and we have matched clips here, but for this one, I'm gonna bring in a little more shadow detail so we can see more in here. And if we zoom back in, we still have more noise in this shot that hasn't been touched, and the shadows are darker, and we have less noise here with brighter shadows. It makes sense if you think about it. You give a sensor as much light as possible without actually clipping the sensor, you'll have a lot more to work with. Before the HDR wheels, this would be a little bit harder, because if you would adjust your exposure in the offset, it would not adjust it as closely as adjusting exposure in camera. And that's the whole point of now being able to do this. And the HDR wheels are not new, but they give you a very exact, very close exposure adjustment to what it would be like changing your exposure in the camera. In the past, I would just kind of like accurately expose it. Now, for more technical videos, like product videos, for example, you can give the camera as much light as it will take, expose as hot as you can without clipping it, view the monitor with a specific LUT to bring down the exposure to make it be acceptable to somebody that's watching. Intense scene going on back here right now. Such a good movie. Could be a good thing to experiment with just on a creative level in creating unique images, and definitely good to do this in certain applications where you will be using VFX or stabilization, or you're trying to pull stills from your image that need to be clean, or you're cropping into your image and don't want to see the noise. Expose hotter, bring down the exposure in post to match what you would have originally exposed at, but then you can bring up your shadows to be brighter than the accurately exposed image, but also have less noise. That's kind of like a magical thing to me. All right, that's it. I'm out. Peace.